I'm the SVP of Operations and Public Policy at what we call TAG. The Trustworthy Accountability Group is a little bit too much of a mouthpiece, or a mouthful, and I am the mouthpiece of the mouthful. So let's set the stage a little bit first around where we are as an industry on brand safety today and what we mean by brand safety. This is, how many of you are thinking about brand safety in the course of your day? How many of you feel like you have a well-defined understanding of what you even mean by brand safety? That looks about right. Okay, and you're not alone, because I think one of the big problems at the moment, or one of the big challenges, is we all are talking about brand safety. It's one of the biggest buzzwords in this industry right now. But when we seek to actually define what we're talking about here, it's a little bit of a unicorn, right? When we are talking about brand safety, getting your arms around what you mean by that and what we as an industry, I would say, need to mean by that it's fairly elusive. And so TAG has been not only doing our day jobs in thinking about how to stop crime in this industry, but also trying to sort of facilitate the industry in figuring out exactly how we should be defining brand safety, and figuring out all of the components of that, and then, of course, how best to go about ensuring it in all of these different areas. So we've been doing that by searching the bounds of the interwebs for how people are talking about brand safety, going to many conferences and looking across agendas at who is framing it in what different ways. And we've also been undertaking a whole series of interviews with our members at TAG, the leaders in this industry more broadly, to understand, again, how folks are thinking about this as well as what they're doing about it. So, Eric, you mentioned 3 or maybe 4 things that folks think of as brand safety today, but what we're seeing is a little bit of a broader list. It's actually quite a long list. The responses that we're getting are many and varied when we think about what we mean by brand safety as individual companies or sectors of the industry or digital advertising as a whole. It's everything from all of this is brand safety to folks who have much more limited and defined definitions. We've talked to some companies who think of brand safety very specifically as ensuring that your ads don't appear in a context that could be reputationally concerning for that particular brand. There are other folks who consider things like ad blocking and latency and data protection not to be included in brand safety, and others who think that that's absolutely fundamental to it. There are some who have very defined frameworks for how they think about this in terms of not just what is included in brand safety, but how you address these issues, and looking at it from a 3-part perspective or 3 filters of reputational risk and financial risk and legal risk. And so again, not just knowing that it's important, but actually sort of categorizing how you go about solving these issues based on those 3 sorts of filters. And of course, perhaps unsurprisingly, one of the biggest variations in how people are talking about brand safety in this issue depends on where they sit in the supply chain, right? We've got I think adjacency up here. Well, when you say adjacency to an advertiser, to a buyer, an agency, adjacency is all about making sure that your ads don't show up next to very problematic content. But in talking to publishers, of course, adjacency means making sure that there isn't an ISIS ad that happens to show up next to your premium content. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind that this very large and broad and an important area in which we are all concerned and working varies significantly depending on where we're all sitting and what perspective we're bringing to the table there. The good news is we're all working very hard on it. And as an industry, I've been in this industry for a long time. TAG is not the first self-regulatory body that I've worked on in this industry. And so I'm quite familiar with exactly how serious this industry is about solving these problems, and we're getting quite good at doing it together at this point. So those are just some of the organizations that this industry either works with or has created in order to address various aspects of brand safety. So you may be familiar, I hope, with the Ad Choices icon, the Digital Advertising Alliance, one of the more recognizable 10 or 12 years in now, ways in which consumers have choice. They deal with privacy and the sort of data issues behind digital advertising and give consumers the choice about how they want to be contacted with advertisements in the digital space. Now, TAG, of course, is where I spend my days at this point, and we are focused on the criminal activity that goes on in a legitimate supply chain. So we focus specifically on fraud and piracy and malware and the transparency that's needed to make sure that criminals can't hide in what is an incredibly complicated transactional system that we've created as an industry. So that's where we are, the criminal activity aspect. And then one of the newer kids on the block is the Coalition for Better Ads, which is focused really much more on that ad experience from the consumer perspective. So issues of latency, issues of annoying ads, et cetera, et cetera. So you can sort of get all of these different perspectives that we have to bring to this issue of brand safety. And Eric mentioned the IAB Tech Lab, who's a wonderful partner to those of us on Team TAG in coming up with technical solutions for some of these problems. So Eric mentioned ads.txt. I'll also mention the lean principles, which are incredibly important when it comes to that consumer ad experience. And ads.txt is incredibly important to us at TAG in our work on fighting fraud. And then the MRC, of course, does a lot of good things that are unrelated to the digital advertising space, but the invalid traffic guidelines that they developed and keep up underlie TAG's entire program on fraud. So also very important in this space. So the good news is, in my perspective, in my opinion, we're getting very good at doing these kinds of things together as an industry. And I'm going to now dive a little bit deeper on the part of doing things well together that TAG plays. So TAG's role on brand safety is, well, I'll say everything we do is about brand safety, right? We are focused on the criminal aspects of, keeping your brand safe, avoiding the criminal aspects in order to keep your brand safe. But there isn't anything in our bailiwick that isn't about brand safety. So we have 5 different programs at TAG. The first is a verification program. We don't work with any companies that we can't have pass our background check. So that we know that when you look at the TAG registry of known companies, these are companies that are the real Disney or the real Procter or the real Group M, so that you can be sure that you aren't working with a criminal spoofing a legitimate brand or pretending to be a legitimate supplier in this supply chain. That verification, the Verified by TAG program, is the foundation under which all of our certification programs are built. So until you are verified by TAG, we will not work with you on certifying any of your business practices. But once you are, we work with you in 4 different areas. So TAG has certification programs on fraud, piracy, and malware. We have an additional one called the Inventory Quality Guidelines Certification, which is a transparency program to make sure that we have transparency in how we're categorizing both inventory and creative so that there's much better clarity between the buy and sell side about what is actually being transacted. Part of our philosophy at TAG is we've gotten ourselves into these situations as an industry with this unfortunate criminal activity occurring in the legitimate supply chain because things have gotten so complicated, because there's been a lack of transparency. And so TAG's 4th, and I would say somewhat most important part of our mission, the 4th pillar, is increasing business transparency. And that's the one that probably evolves the most over time as new challenges come into our minds as an industry, particularly when it comes to new brand safety challenges. So the way that we work at TAG is really a multi-layered and multidisciplinary approach. So our certifications aren't just for vendors or intermediaries or publishers or advertisers. They're for everybody. The problems that we're trying to solve, I would say generally when it comes to brand safety, but particularly in TAG's bailiwick, cannot be solved without engagement, very strong engagement from every single part of that supply chain. So when we design a certification, we do it in a way that has roles to play for every part, from advertiser and agency and intermediary and publisher and all of those vendors that might be related across the supply chain. Now that doesn't mean that everybody has the same role to play, of course. So all of these different requirements that you see here apply to those different kinds of business models in different ways. So what makes this certification so powerful, what makes the program so powerful, is that you've got so many different kinds of checks all across the transaction, such that when the transaction finishes, it hasn't just been checked once for fraud or filtered once for fraud. There's been preventative actions like ads.text, the publisher communicating in the first place, this is where you can buy my inventory in a legitimate way, and if you aren't following that ads.text file, you're probably buying fraudulent content. And then moving down the supply chain, requiring publishers to disclose if they're buying traffic, right? Because we know that there are higher levels of fraud if you're sourcing your traffic in a paid way. And then down into the intermediary space, making sure that at every step in the supply chain, fraud is measured and filtered for particular kinds of threats. And then all the way down again, making sure that you've got this chain of custody through our payment ID system, such that if some fraud does occur, you actually have a possibility of going back and finding where it happened, and not simply having this frustrating conversation between the buy and sell side about how to have a remediation, how to have a clawback. Excuse me. We also are collaborative in our solutions. So the certifications only work if everybody's involved. The certifications only work if you've got collaboration underlying these programs. So in addition to actually writing audit standards for what it means to be certified against fraud or piracy or malware, we also develop, very often with the IAB Tech Lab or others, technical solutions and tools to help companies comply with those standards. That's everything from the tag registry that I mentioned, that sort of white pages for the industry, so that if someone's in the tag registry, you can look them up and see if they're certified in this or that, and in what countries, geographically, et cetera, so you know much more about who your partners are. To things like the data center IP list and pirate mobile app list, which again are tools where the industry pools their own intel in order to create the strongest block lists for data center threats, pirate mobile app threats, et cetera. And then at the moment, we are in beta, soon to be general release, for our threat sharing hub, which will be the place where this entire industry can come together to share the malware or malvertising threats that they're seeing, such that we not only can make sure that those attacks are significantly shortened, fewer infections in the first place, but also we can track the trends and have a greater likelihood of actually working with our dear law enforcement partners in order to catch these criminals and reduce the issues that we're all having coming down the pike in the first place. The really good news is it seems to be working quite well, and here's why. Again, not to sound too redundant, but this isn't just about one partner that you work with getting certified and calling it a day. It's not about making sure that your anti-fraud vendor is certified. It's about making sure that everybody you work with is following these rules and that you're following them yourself. And the reason that that's so important is we've done some research in the past few months that I sort of call the Procter and Gamble hypothesis, bearing out the P&G hypothesis. They, almost a year and a half ago now, at ALM, at the IB conference, said, we are only going to work with companies that are tag certified against fraud. The entire supply chain that P&G works with has to be certified against fraud. And so what basically they've required is everybody has to do that filtering and that cleaning up and that ads.text and all of those different requirements at every step in that transaction. So our CEO, Mike, is very fond of saying, why would you want single filtered water when you could have triple filtered water? And that's really exactly what tag accomplishes. Your inventory, your transaction is being filtered and scanned and corrected so many times down the supply chain that when you are buying through a tag certified channel, we're seeing 84% reductions in fraud rates against the industry average. So we're getting fraud rates down from 12 or 8% to 1.84%. But again, only if everybody is participating. The even better news is everybody's participating. So this is just in the past year, and the numbers have gotten even better since then, I'm delighted to say. We did this slide back in December, and you can see just in 1 year, folks have absolutely just jumped at adoption of this certification. We're seeing more and more companies say in the US and international markets that they'll only work with partners who are certified. And what has resulted is, we've got over 300 companies in the white pages, the tag registry at this point. 120 of them have 80 of them have earned over 120 certification seals between them, because many companies aren't just doing fraud. They're recognizing that you actually can't fight fraud without fighting piracy and malware and having good transparency as well. So we're seeing more and more companies do the full suite. We call them our super users, with all 4 certifications. And that means that we've also had massive growth internationally as well. So TAG now has more than 130 or 150 companies outside of the US in about 30 countries rather. So the adoption is growing and growing and growing, which has been wonderful to see. And that means that we're really making progress as an industry. I mean, some fantastic headlines over the past year in terms of seeing fraud plunge, seeing piracy plunge as well. I didn't speak to the research that we did there, but when folks are certified against piracy, we're seeing 50% and more reductions in the ad revenue that's going to pirates. So that program is also bearing out as a very successful one as well. All right, so that's where we are. So that's a fairly happy, shiny, we're on our way kind of look at things, but there's still plenty more work to be done. So what's next? Here are some things that we're thinking about at TAG at the moment that I hope you'll think about with us. Defining brand safety, right? I think it's really important that we get our arms around and really define, not just as an industry, but as individual companies, what brand safety is going to mean for each of us. And again, it will be different depending on where you are and what your priorities are and how your business runs, and that's okay. What TAG is trying to do is help make sure that you're considering the full scope as you then define. So we are preparing to release a series of white papers over the next few months defining brand safety based on what this industry is talking about and thinking about, and also on the challenges of brand safety and what the best practices are for fighting those challenges, for resolving those issues. We're also starting to see the rise of the brand safety officer, which we think is very exciting, not just because we need more people in our C-suite, but because we need to make sure that there's somebody who's having this kind of filter for what brand safety is and looking out and making sure that it's reflected. I remember my background originally is in privacy and data security, and I remember the rise of the chief privacy officer and what a game changer that was in terms of making sure that a company was complying in all different situations, and the amount of sort of risk and liability that has been cleaned up just by virtue of having a cop on the beat internally, a friendly cop on the beat, to help make sure that things are built right in the first place. And that's exactly what a brand safety officer can do as well, especially in an area that, again, we need to define and also will continue to be elusive in some ways as long as all of us are around. And the reason is the challenges are going to keep evolving, right? So having that person focused in the company on making sure that brand safety as it's defined today is being taken care of, but also looking down the field at what else is coming is going to be really important. It's not enough, though, to have one person in your company whose day job this is. I have been a person like that in a company, and without the team and the buy-in at all levels and all business units, that's just a nice chair to sit in by yourself. So I think developing that brand safety mindset throughout companies is going to be equally important. I think having that BSO to help lead that charge is important, but making sure that folks are thinking through the concepts of brand safety and kind of having that checklist in the back of their minds as they're going about their days is going to resolve a lot of the smaller things that are getting by right now, if we're all just kind of thinking about this in a structured way. And I'd say that the continued industry collaboration is going to be a huge part of the solution here. I would not work in this industry if it wasn't one that I thought was able and willing to collaborate in ways that actually solve problems. It's been an inspiring career to have in this industry, to watch. And so I highly expect and believe that it's possible for us to solve whatever comes down the pike if we continue to have great trade associations like the IAB and the 4As and the ANA taking the lead and creating groups like TAG and the DAA and the CBA, but also just generally having us come together in the transactions of our clients and partners and thinking about these issues together.